The bank manager's voice was calm, professional. "Ms. Rodriguez, we received your request to halt all automatic transfers from your accounts to the mortgage on Maple Street. Are you certain you want to proceed?" I stared out my office window at the Seattle skyline, rain streaking down the glass like tears I'd stopped crying years ago. "Absolutely certain," I replied. "Cancel everything effective immediately." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. There was a pause. "Ma'am, this will put the property into immediate default. The homeowners will receive a notice within 72 hours. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Perfect. Thank you for your assistance." As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from my younger sister Emma. "Dad's really sorry about what he said. Can we talk?" I deleted it without responding. Because some words, once spoken, can't be taken back. And some daughters, once awakened, refuse to go back to sleep. My name is Carmen Rodriguez, and if you think this story ends with me crawling back home with an apology, you don't know me at all. What happens when the person who called you their greatest burden discovers you were actually their greatest blessing? What happens when silence becomes your strongest weapon and boundaries become your best investment? The truth is, I wasn't supposed to hear what my father said that night. I wasn't supposed to be standing outside the kitchen when he exploded at my mother about the family finances. But life has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be, even when it breaks your heart in the process. Carmen thinks she's so smart with her fancy job and her downtown apartment. His voice had carried through the thin walls of the house I'd been secretly paying for. Always acting like she's better than us, like we're some kind of charity case. Well, maybe it's time she learned what a real burden feels like. My mother's voice was softer, trying to calm him down. "David, she's just trying to help. You know the mortgage payment has been difficult since your hours got cut." "Help?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She's making us dependent on her. Writing those checks every month like she's our landlord. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of her acting like we owe her something. She's nothing but a burden on this family's pride. Always has been." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hands still reaching for the light switch I'd come to turn on. A burden. The daughter who had worked 3 jobs through college to avoid student loans. The daughter who sent money home every month without being asked. The daughter who paid for Dad's truck repairs, Mom's medical bills, and Emma's textbooks without keeping a running tab. I was a burden. I backed away from the kitchen slowly, grabbed my purse from the counter where I'd left it, and walked out the front door. I didn't slam it. I didn't announce my departure. I just left, the way you leave a place that was never really home to begin with. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of streetlights and sudden clarity. For the first time in years, everything made perfect sense. The missed family dinners, where they'd complain about money while I sat there, knowing I could fix it with a single phone call. The way they'd mention financial stress in casual conversation, never directly asking, but always making sure I knew. The guilt trips when I couldn't attend some event because of work, as if my career was an inconvenience to their social calendar. I'd been paying their mortgage for 2 years. Not just helping with it, paying it entirely. After Dad's hours got cut at the manufacturing plant, and Mom's part-time job at the grocery store barely covered groceries, I'd quietly taken over the monthly payment. $847, transferred automatically from my checking account every month. They thought I was just contributing. They had no idea I was carrying the entire load. But I wasn't just paying their mortgage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I was paying their property taxes through a separate account I'd set up. I was covering their homeowners insurance through my own policy. When their water heater died last winter, I replaced it. When their roof started leaking, I paid for the repairs. When Dad's truck needed new brakes, I covered it. When Mom needed glasses, I bought them. I'd become their silent patron, their invisible safety net, their unacknowledged foundation. And tonight, I'd learned exactly what they thought of me for it. The apartment felt different when I walked in. Quieter, but not empty. More like a sanctuary than it had ever felt before. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my couch, looking at the stack of mail on my coffee table. Bills I paid on time. Statements from accounts that were healthy because I lived below my means. Investment portfolios that grew because I chose savings over shopping sprees. I'd built a good life for myself, and apparently I'd been building one for them too. My phone started buzzing. A call from Emma. I let it go to voicemail. Then, Mom called. Voicemail. Then Dad. I turned the phone face down and finished my wine. Whatever family crisis was erupting could wait until morning. I had some thinking to do. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my banking app. It was all there in black and white, 24 months of automatic transfers. Mortgage payments, insurance premiums, tax payments, emergency repairs. Not including the cash I'd handed over for birthdays, holidays, and random crises. I started calculating, and the number made my stomach turn. $63,000. In 2 years, I'd quietly invested $63,000 in people who saw me as a burden. But here's what they didn't understand about burdens. Real burdens are heavy. They weigh you down. They make you move slower, think harder, choose more carefully. And once you set a burden down, you realize how much stronger you were for carrying it, and how much lighter you feel without it. I opened a new browser tab and logged into the mortgage company's website. My name wasn't on the deed, but it was on every payment authorization. I was listed as the primary payer, with full access to modify or cancel the payment arrangements. They'd never bothered to ask why I had so much control over their mortgage. They'd just been grateful someone else was handling it. The cancellation form was surprisingly simple. Account number, authorization code, effective date. I could end their safety net with a few mouse clicks. But I didn't, not yet. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about education. And the best lessons are the ones that unfold slowly, the ones that give you time to really understand what you've lost. Instead, I opened my notes app and started writing. Not a letter, not an explanation, just a list. Every payment I'd made, every emergency I'd covered, every time I'd said yes when they needed help, and every time they'd said no when I needed support. The pattern was so clear when you laid it out in black and white. I gave. They took. I asked for nothing. They expected everything. The list was longer than I expected. It wasn't just the mortgage. It was groceries when money was tight. Gas money when they wanted to visit Emma at college. The security deposit for Emma's apartment that they couldn't afford. The vet bills when their dog got sick. The heating repair that couldn't wait. The Christmas gifts for Emma that they bought with money I'd given them. Layer after layer of financial support they'd convinced themselves they deserved and convinced me I owed. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Mom says you left weird tonight. Everything okay? I stared at the message for a long time. Emma was 22, still in college, still living in the bubble where parents are heroes and older sisters are resources. She had no idea how much of her comfortable life was subsidized by my silence. She thought Mom and Dad were just really good at managing money. She thought their generosity toward her came from their own pockets. I typed back. Everything's fine. Just tired. It wasn't a lie. I was tired. Exhausted, actually. Tired of being the family's financial foundation while being treated like its emotional afterthought. Tired of working extra hours to cover their comfort while they complained about my work schedule. Tired of being needed but never wanted. Valued but never appreciated. The next morning brought clarity like I'd never experienced. I woke up without the usual knot in my stomach that came from checking my phone for family crises that would require my wallet. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from having money, but the kind that comes from deciding how to spend it. I made coffee, strong and black, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. The mortgage payment was due in 5 days. I could let it process one more time, give them a chance to apologize, pretend I'd never heard what Dad said. Or I could follow through on the lesson that was already forming in my mind. I pulled up the bank website and hovered my cursor over the cancellation button. But before I clicked, I did something I'd never done before. I calculated what my life would look like without them in it financially. The $847 a month I'd have back, the emergency fund I could finally build for myself instead of being theirs, the vacation I could take instead of funding their comfort, the investments I could make in my own future instead of subsidizing their present. For the first time in my adult life, I could be selfish. And it felt terrifying and liberating all at once. My phone rang. Dad's name on the screen. I let it ring through to voicemail, then played the message back. Carmen, your mother wants to know if you're coming for dinner Sunday. She's making that chicken thing you like. His voice was normal, casual, like the conversation I'd overheard had never happened. Like I was still the dutiful daughter who showed up when called and paid when needed. I deleted the voicemail and made my decision. The cursor clicked. The screen flashed. Payment authorizations successfully canceled. Account holder will receive confirmation within 24 hours. I screenshotted it, not because I wanted to show anyone, but because I wanted to remember this moment. The moment I chose my own dignity over their comfort. The bank would send them a notice explaining that their automatic payment had been canceled by the authorized payer. They'd have 3 days to make alternative arrangements before the late fee kicked in. 30 days before the foreclosure process began. Enough time to figure it out if they were willing to take responsibility for their own lives. I closed the laptop and got ready for work. Another day at the consulting firm, where I'd built a reputation for turning around failing businesses. The irony wasn't lost on me. I specialized in teaching companies how to identify toxic relationships with vendors, how to eliminate dependencies that were draining their resources, how to make hard decisions that prioritized long-term health over short-term comfort. I just applied my professional expertise to my personal life. At work, I moved through my morning meetings with a focus I hadn't felt in months. No distractions about family drama. No mental calculations about which bills I'd need to cover next. No anxiety about money because I wasn't hemorrhaging it anymore. My assistant noticed. You seem different today, Carmen. More centered. I smiled, just making some changes in my financial portfolio. The first call came at 11:30. Mom, panicked. Carmen, honey, something's wrong with the mortgage payment. The bank says it's been canceled. There must be some mistake. I was in the middle of a client presentation, so I sent it to voicemail. The second call came 20 minutes later. Dad, confused and angry. Carmen, what the hell is going on with the bank? They're saying we need to make our own payment arrangements. This is insane. Voicemail. The third call came from Emma during my lunch break. Carmen, Mom and Dad are freaking out about some bank thing. They think someone stole their identity or something. Can you help them figure it out? This one I answered. Hey Em, what's going on? I kept my voice light, curious. The bank is telling them their mortgage payment got canceled, and they don't understand why. Dad thinks it's some kind of scam. Can you call them? You're good with financial stuff. I paused, as if I was thinking it through. That does sound weird. Are they sure they've been making the payments themselves? Emma laughed. Yeah, of course they have. They're super responsible with bills. That's why this is so confusing. I almost choked. Super responsible. Right. I'll see what I can do, I said. Tell them not to panic. These things usually work themselves out. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the parking garage and laughed until tears came. Not from humor, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. They'd been living a lie for so long they'd started believing it themselves. They thought they were responsible homeowners. They thought they'd been managing their own finances. They thought I was just their generous daughter who occasionally helped out. They had no idea they'd been living in a house of cards, and I'd been the only thing keeping it from collapsing. The afternoon brought more calls, more voicemails, more panic. By 5 o'clock, my phone had 17 missed calls from various family members. I listened to one voicemail from Dad. Carmen, this is serious. The bank wants the full payment by Friday, or we go into default. I don't know what kind of mix-up this is, but you need to help us fix it. This isn't some game. He was right. It wasn't a game. Games have winners and losers. This was just me finally reading the rules correctly. Instead of calling back, I drove to the gym. I worked out harder than I had in months, letting every representative burn away years of resentment and obligation. When I got home, I ordered takeout from the expensive Thai place I'd always wanted to try but couldn't justify because I was sending $800 a month to Seattle suburbs. The pad Thai was incredible. My phone rang again while I was eating. This time it was Mom, and her voice was different. Scared. "Carmen, please call us back. We need to talk to you about this bank situation. It's getting serious. And we don't understand what's happening. Please, honey, we need your help." I finished my dinner, cleaned my kitchen, and poured myself another glass of wine. Then I called them back. Dad answered on the first ring. "Carmen! Thank God. This bank thing is insane. They're saying our payment authorization was canceled by someone with account access, but that's impossible because we're the only ones who have access to our mortgage." I let the silence stretch. Long enough for him to realize what he'd just said. Long enough for the lie to hang in the air between us. "Dad," I said quietly, "who do you think has been making your mortgage payments for the last 2 years?" Another silence. This one felt like falling. "What do you mean?" His voice was smaller now. "You've been helping us out, but we've been making the payments ourselves." I took a sip of wine and looked out at the city lights. "No, Dad. I've been making the payments. All of them. Every month for 24 months. $847 automatically transferred from my account to yours. You haven't made a mortgage payment since March of 2023. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could hear my mother in the background asking what was wrong, why he looked like that. "Carmen," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea. We thought you were just helping with groceries and stuff." "I was helping with everything, Dad. Mortgage, insurance, taxes, repairs. $63,000 over 2 years. While you called me a burden on the family's pride." I heard him suck in a breath. He knew I'd heard. "Carmen, listen. What I said last night, I was frustrated about work, and I took it out on you. That's not what I meant." "No," I said, my voice steady as steel. "That's exactly what you meant. And now you know what a real burden feels like. The burden of paying your own bills." I hung up before he could respond. My side wasame, hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. For the first time in years, I felt perfectly calm. Because the truth, once spoken, has a way of settling everything into place. The next morning brought 3 voicemails, 2 missed calls, and a text from Emma that simply read, "What did you do?" I deleted them all without listening or responding. Instead, I made myself breakfast for the first time in weeks. Real breakfast, not just coffee and whatever granola bar I could grab on my way out the door. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit. I sat at my kitchen table and ate slowly, tasting every bite without the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach about what financial crisis might be waiting for me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. I answered out of curiosity. "Is this Carmen Rodriguez?" The voice was professional, unfamiliar. "This is Janet from Pacific Northwest Mortgage Services. I'm calling regarding the property at 847 Maple Street. We show you as the authorized payment contact, but we received notice yesterday that automatic payments have been discontinued. The homeowners are quite upset and claim this is an error." I leaned back in my chair, suddenly understanding that this was just the beginning. "No error," I said calmly. "I discontinued the payments as requested." There was a pause. "Ma'am, the homeowners are saying they never requested discontinuation. They're asking if we can reinstate the automatic payments immediately to avoid any late fees." "The homeowners," I repeated slowly, "haven't been making their own payments." "I have. For 24 months. And as of yesterday, I'm no longer able to assist them with their financial obligations." Janet's voice became more cautious. "I see. Well, in that case, the homeowners will need to make alternative arrangements. The payment is due tomorrow, and without it, the account will be considered in default." After I hung up, I sat with the weight of what I'd just confirmed. They were scrambling. Calling the bank, probably calling relatives, trying to figure out how to come up with nearly $900 by tomorrow when they'd never had to think about it before. The money they thought they'd been saving by, quote, managing their finances so well, had never existed. Their financial stability had been an illusion I'd maintained for them. I started thinking about how it all began, how I'd become their secret benefactor without ever meaning to. It started small, the way these things always do. 3 years ago, when Dad first got his hours cut at the plant, he'd mentioned it casually at Sunday dinner, how he'd gone from 40 hours a week to 32. Budget's going to be tight for a while, he'd said, cutting into Mom's pot roast like it was just another minor inconvenience. Mom had nodded, but I saw the worry in her eyes, the way she started calculating in her head, figuring out which bills could wait and which ones couldn't. I'd offered to help with groceries that week. Just that week, I'd said, just until things picked up at work. But things didn't pick up. Dad's hours stayed cut, and 32 became 28, then became 24. The plant was downsizing, and at 56, Dad wasn't exactly a priority for the remaining full-time positions. So groceries became utilities. Utilities became insurance premiums. Insurance premiums became mortgage payments. Each time, they'd acted like it was temporary. Each time, they'd promised to pay me back once things improved. Each time, I'd told them not to worry about it, that family helps family, that I was happy to contribute. And I had been happy, at first. It felt good to be needed, to be the successful daughter who could swoop in and solve problems. It felt like I was finally repaying them for all the years they'd invested in me. But somewhere along the way, helping became expected. Expected became demanded. And demanded became resented, though I couldn't figure out why. I was solving their problems, making their lives easier, ensuring they could maintain their middle-class lifestyle without the middle-class income. What I didn't realize was that I was also making them feel small. And people who feel small sometimes make the people helping them feel smaller in return. The pattern had been there all along, I just hadn't wanted to see it. Every family gathering where Dad would complain about his job situation while I sat there knowing I could fix it with a single transfer. Every conversation where Mom would stress about money while wearing the coat I'd bought her, in the house I was paying for, cooking dinner with groceries I'd funded. They'd gotten comfortable with their discomfort because they knew I'd always step in to solve it. And I had. Every single time. When their washing machine died, I bought them a new one. When their car needed major repairs, I covered it. When Emma needed money for textbooks, I sent it directly to her account. When they wanted to take a vacation for their anniversary, I quietly deposited enough money to make it happen. I'd become their invisible patron saint, their silent partner in maintaining a lifestyle they couldn't afford. But the invisible part was the problem. They'd gotten so used to my help that they'd forgotten it was help at all. In their minds, things just worked out. Bills got paid, emergencies got resolved, life continued smoothly. They'd started to believe they were just really good at managing money, really lucky that things always seemed to work out when they needed them to. My phone rang again. This time it was Emma, and I could hear the panic in her voice before she even spoke. "Carmen, what is going on? Mom and Dad are completely freaking out. They're saying the bank is trying to foreclose on the house, and they don't understand why. Dad's talking about calling lawyers, and Mom's been crying all morning. They think someone's trying to steal their house." I closed my eyes and tried to remember when Emma had become so naive, when she'd stopped seeing the financial reality of our family. But then I realized she'd never seen it at all. She'd been away at college when things got bad, supported by a combination of scholarships, student loans, and mysterious deposits that appeared in her account whenever she needed them. Deposits I'd made, though she'd assumed they came from Mom and Dad. I said carefully, "Have you ever wondered how Mom and Dad managed to pay for everything on Dad's reduced salary?" There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "They're just really good with money. They've always been responsible about bills and stuff." I almost laughed. "Responsible. Right. And you think they've been paying for your apartment, your textbooks, your groceries all by themselves?" "Of course they have. I mean, I have student loans for tuition, but yeah, they help with living expenses. They're amazing parents." The innocence in her voice broke my heart a little. She genuinely believed our parents were financial wizards who could support 2 households on 1 part-time income. She had no idea that her comfortable college experience was funded by her sister's sacrifice. "Emma," I said gently, "Mom and Dad haven't paid their own mortgage in 2 years. I have. I've been covering their house payment, their insurance, their taxes, and most of your college expenses. The money you think is coming from them is coming from me." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "What?" Her voice was tiny, confused. "That's not possible. They would have told me." "Would they? Would they really want you to know that their financial stability was dependent on their daughter, who they constantly criticize for working too much and visiting too little?" I could hear her trying to process this information, trying to reconcile the story she'd been living with the truth I was telling her. But why wouldn't they tell me? Why would they let me think they were handling everything? "Because," I said, looking out at the city I'd chosen over the suburbs they'd tried to guilt me into moving back to, "it's easier to accept help when you can pretend it's not help at all. It's easier to take money when you can convince yourself you deserve it. And it's easier to criticize the person helping you when you've forgotten they're helping at all." Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller, but sharper. "So when Dad complains about you never visiting, and Mom talks about how you're too focused on your career, and they both act like you think you're better than us." She trailed off, understanding dawning. "They're talking about the person who's been keeping them afloat." "Exactly," I said, "and last night I found out what they really think of me for it." I told her about the conversation I'd overheard, about being called a burden while I was literally carrying their financial burden. I told her about the years of taking their criticism while subsidizing their comfort. I told her about the bank call, about canceling the payments, about deciding I was done being their silent patron. When I finished, Emma was crying. "Carmen, I had no idea. I thought they were just really good at managing money. I thought they were supporting me out of their own success. I feel so stupid." Her voice cracked. "And I feel terrible. All those times I took their side when they complained about you working too much. All those times I thought you were being dramatic about family stuff. You were literally paying for my opinions." It was the first time in years that someone in my family had acknowledged what I'd been carrying. The first time someone had recognized the gap between perception and reality. But it also made me realize how deep the deception had gone. Emma wasn't just innocent about our parents' finances. She'd been actively used as a weapon against me, though she hadn't known it. "Em," I said, "I need you to understand something. This isn't about punishing them or punishing you. This is about me finally refusing to enable a system that was making everyone comfortable except the person paying for the comfort." She sniffled. "But what's going to happen to them? To the house? They can't afford the mortgage payment on their own." "No," I agreed, "they can't. And for the first time in 2 years, that's going to be their problem to solve, not mine." There was another long pause. "Are you going to help them figure it out?" she asked, and I could hear the hope in her voice. The assumption that I'd eventually cave, that this was just a temporary lesson, that family meant I'd always come back to fix things. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That depends on whether they're willing to acknowledge what I've been doing for them, and whether they're willing to treat me like family instead of like an ATM with feelings." After we hung up, I realized something important. Emma's shock at learning the truth meant that my parents had been lying to her too. They'd been taking credit for supporting her, letting her believe they were generous parents who sacrificed for their children's education. They'd been playing the role of loving providers while I wrote the checks that made that role possible. It wasn't just about me. They'd been lying to everyone. I spent the rest of the morning doing something I hadn't done in months. I worked on my own projects. I'd been developing a side consulting business, helping small companies optimize their financial strategies. It was work I loved, work that challenged me, work that could eventually let me leave my corporate job and be my own boss. But I'd been putting it on the back burner because my free time was always consumed by family financial crises. Now, suddenly, I had time, mental energy that wasn't being drained by constant worry about other people's bills. Focus that wasn't scattered by guilt about not doing enough for people who never seemed to think I did enough anyway. For the first time in years, I could invest in my own future instead of subsidizing their present. My phone buzzed with another text from Dad. "Carmen, please call us. This bank situation is getting serious." And we need to understand what happened. We're going to lose the house if we can't get this sorted out." I stared at the message for a long time. The desperation was new. Usually, when they needed something from me, the requests came wrapped in casual conversation, family obligations, emotional manipulation. This was different. This was raw panic. Good. Panic meant they were finally understanding the reality of their situation. Panic meant they could no longer pretend everything was fine. Panic meant they were being forced to confront the truth they'd been avoiding for 2 years. I didn't text back. Instead, I opened my laptop and started working on a business plan I'd been putting off for months. My consulting firm, Rodriguez Financial Strategy, would specialize in helping families and small businesses identify financial dependencies that were hindering their growth. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years enabling financial dysfunction in my own family while building a career helping others avoid the same mistakes. But maybe that was exactly what qualified me for the work. Maybe you had to live through financial codependency to really understand how to break it. Maybe you had to be the enabler before you could teach others how to stop enabling. Maybe you had to lose yourself in someone else's financial chaos before you could help them find their way to independence. Around noon, my office phone rang. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Carmen, there's a woman on line 2 who says she's your mother. She sounds upset and says it's an emergency." I stared at the blinking light for a moment. They'd escalated to calling my workplace. They were getting desperate enough to cross boundaries they'd never crossed before. "Tell her I'll call her back later," I said. "I'm in meetings all afternoon." It wasn't true, but it wasn't exactly a lie either. I was in a meeting with myself, trying to figure out how to rebuild a relationship with my family that had been built on financial inequality from the beginning. That was going to take more than an afternoon. My assistant buzzed back a few minutes later. "Your mother asked me to tell you that your father wants to apologize for whatever he said, and they really need to talk to you about an urgent financial matter." I almost smiled. Even in crisis, they couldn't be direct. Even when they were facing foreclosure, they couldn't just say, "We need you to pay our bills." They had to frame it as needing to talk about a financial matter, as if I was their financial advisor rather than their unpaid benefactor. "Thank you," I told my assistant. "If she calls back, please take a message." I spent the afternoon reviewing my own finances, something I hadn't done in detail for months. It was like looking at a different person's life. Without the monthly drain of supporting my parents, my savings rate was nearly 40% of my income. Without the constant emergency payments for their crises, my investment accounts were actually growing. Without the mental load of managing their financial problems, I had energy left over for my own goals. I'd been living like a person who made half my actual salary, and I hadn't even realized it. I'd been so focused on keeping them afloat that I'd forgotten to build my own boat. For 2 years, I'd been treading water while making sure they stayed dry, and they'd called me a burden for it. The numbers told a story I'd been too close to see. In the last 2 years, I'd given them the equivalent of a luxury car. I'd funded their comfort to the tune of more than most people made in a year. I'd been their anonymous donor, their secret investor, their invisible partner in maintaining a middle-class lifestyle they couldn't afford. And not once had they said thank you. Not once had they acknowledged what I was sacrificing. Not once had they asked how I was managing to support 2 households on one salary. They'd just taken and taken and taken, while convincing themselves they were entitled to take more. My phone rang again. "Emma." This time I answered. "Hey," she said, her voice shaky. "I just got off the phone with Mom and Dad. They're really scared, Carmen. They don't know how to come up with the mortgage payment, and they're talking about trying to get a loan. But Dad's credit isn't great because of some missed payments a few years ago." "Missed payments that I covered," I said quietly. "The late fees I paid so his credit wouldn't get worse." Emma was quiet. "They didn't tell me that part." Of course they hadn't. They'd probably told her that their credit had recovered naturally, that they'd worked hard to rebuild it. They wouldn't mention that their credit was only intact, because I'd been paying their bills on time while they figured out how to manage their reduced income. "Carmen," Emma said carefully, "I know what they said was horrible. And I know you've been doing way more than any of us realized. But is there any way you could help them one more time? Just until they figure out a plan?" The question I'd been dreading. The assumption that because I could help, I should help. The belief that my money was somehow family money. that my financial stability was a resource to be shared rather than an achievement to be respected. I said, what do you think would happen if I paid this month's mortgage? She was quiet, thinking. They'd have more time to figure out a solution? I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No. They'd breathe a sigh of relief, go back to their normal routine, and expect me to pay next month's too. And the month after that. And the month after that. This isn't a temporary crisis, this is their reality. Dad's hours aren't coming back. Mom's job isn't going to start paying more. Without me, they can't afford that house. So what are you saying? She asked, and I could hear the fear in her voice. That they have to sell it? I looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built with my own work, my own choices, my own sacrifices. I'm saying they have to make their own decisions about what they can afford, just like everyone else does. Emma was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, more mature, more thoughtful. You know what's crazy? I always thought you were the lucky one. Good job, nice apartment, no kids to worry about. I thought you had it so easy compared to them. She paused. I never realized you were working twice as hard because you were supporting twice as many people. It was the most insightful thing anyone in my family had said about my situation in years. Yeah, I said softly. It's been exhausting, and lonely. Being needed but not valued. Being criticized for the very success that allows me to help them. Being treated like I'm selfish while I'm literally giving them my money. I'm so sorry, she said, and she sounded like she really meant it. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I took their side when they complained about you. I'm sorry I thought you were being dramatic when you said they took you for granted. Her voice cracked again. And I'm sorry I've been taking money from you thinking it was coming from them. That must have hurt so much. It did hurt, but hearing her acknowledge it hurt less than carrying it alone. The money isn't the point, Em. The point is that I've been treated like a burden while carrying their burdens. I've been criticized for not giving enough while giving everything. And I'm done pretending that's normal or healthy or sustainable. After we hung up, I felt something shift inside me. Not guilt, not regret, but clarity. Emma's understanding didn't change my decision, but it validated my feelings in a way I hadn't realized I needed. Someone in my family finally saw what I'd been carrying. Someone finally understood why I couldn't carry it anymore. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went out. Not for work, not for obligations, just for myself. I drove to the waterfront and walked along the pier, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. I stopped at a seafood restaurant I'd always wanted to try but had never been able to justify because every discretionary dollar went to family expenses. I ordered the lobster, the expensive wine, the dessert I didn't need but wanted anyway. I sat alone at a table by the window, watching boats drift across Elliott Bay, and for the first time in years I felt rich. Not because of the money in my account, but because of the money that would stay in my account. Not because I could afford luxury, but because I was finally allowing myself to experience it. My phone stayed silent through dinner. No emergency calls, no guilt trips, no financial crises that required my immediate attention. Just quiet, just peace, just the sound of my own thoughts without the constant underlying anxiety about other people's problems. When I got home, there were 4 voicemails waiting. I deleted them without listening. Whatever crisis was unfolding at the house on Maple Street would have to unfold without my participation. For the first time in 2 years, their emergency was not my emergency. Their problem was not my problem. Their burden was not my burden. And I was finally free to carry my own. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Seattle air that makes you feel like anything is possible. I woke up naturally, without an alarm, for the first time in months. No anxiety dreams about family financial disasters. No 3 a.m. panic about whether I'd forgotten to transfer money for some emergency. Just deep, peaceful sleep, and a morning that belonged entirely to me. My coffee tasted different. Richer, somehow. I sat at my kitchen counter reading the news on my tablet, something I'd given up doing because family crises always interrupted before I could finish an article. Today I read 3 pieces about the tech industry, caught up on local politics, and even browsed the arts section. Normal things that normal people do when they're not constantly managing other adults' financial chaos. At exactly 9:15, my phone rang. I knew without looking that it would be Dad. The mortgage payment had been due yesterday, and by now they would have received the default notice. I let it ring through to voicemail, then played the message back while I finished my breakfast. Carmen. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Not angry, not demanding. Defeated. The bank sent a letter. We're officially in default on the house. 30 days to bring the account current, or they start foreclosure proceedings. There was a long pause, and I could hear him breathing, trying to figure out what to say next. I know what I said the other night was wrong. I was angry about other things, and I took it out on you. But we need to talk. Please call me back. I deleted the voicemail and got dressed for work. The apology was interesting. Not because it felt sincere, though it did, but because it had taken financial catastrophe to produce it. He'd had 3 days to call and apologize for calling me a burden. 3 days to acknowledge that his words had been cruel and unfair. But the apology only came when he needed something from me that told me everything I needed to know about its value. On my drive to work, I thought about the psychology of what was happening. In my consulting practice, I'd seen this pattern dozens of times. Companies that became dependent on a single client then resented that client for their own dependency. Employees who relied on one person to solve all their problems then criticized that person for being controlling. Businesses that couldn't function without a particular vendor then complained about being at that vendor's mercy. The solution was always the same: diversify, develop independence, take responsibility for your own sustainability. But getting people to actually do it required them to feel the consequences of their dependency. As long as someone was willing to be their safety net, they had no incentive to build their own. I'd been my family's safety net for so long that they'd forgotten how to fly. Now they were about to remember, whether they wanted to or not. At the office, I threw myself into work with an intensity I hadn't felt in years. Without the constant background worry about family finances, my mind was sharp, focused, creative. I finished a client analysis that had been languishing on my desk for weeks. I drafted a proposal for a new business development strategy that was more innovative than anything I'd produced in months. I even volunteered to take on a complex project that would require travel, something I'd been avoiding because I never knew when a family crisis might erupt, my assistant noticed. "You're on fire today, Carmen. Whatever you changed this week, keep doing it." She had no idea how literal that advice was. I had changed something. I'd stopped setting myself on fire to keep other people warm. Around lunchtime, my personal phone started buzzing with texts. "Emma, Dad called me crying." I've never heard him cry before. "Mom, Carmen, please call us. We need to figure this out together." "Dad, I know I messed up. Don't punish your mother for my stupid words." The last one made me pause. Don't punish your mother. As if this was about punishment rather than self-preservation. As if I was withholding help out of spite rather than finally recognizing that help without boundaries isn't help at all. As if my financial support was something they were entitled to rather than something I'd chosen to give. But more than that, it revealed something important. Dad thought this was about punishing Mom, which meant he still didn't understand that this was about protecting myself. He thought I was angry at them, when really I was just finally tired of being angry at myself for allowing the situation to continue. I didn't respond to any of the texts. Instead, I called my own bank to discuss investment options for the money I'd be keeping, instead of sending to Seattle. The financial advisor was enthusiastic about my suddenly improved cash flow. "With an extra $850 a month, plus the emergency fund you'll be able to build, we can get you on track for early retirement," she said. "You could have your own home paid off in 10 years instead of 20. My own home." The idea felt foreign and thrilling at the same time. I'd been so focused on keeping them in their house that I'd never seriously considered buying my own. I'd been paying their mortgage while renting an apartment, building their equity while building none for myself. I'd been investing in their future while neglecting my own. "Let's set up a meeting," I told the advisor. "I want to explore all my options." After work, I drove home through the neighborhood I'd always dreamed of living in. Tree-lined streets with craftsman houses and small front gardens. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors and had barbecues in their backyards. The kind of place I could afford if I wasn't supporting 2 households. I pulled over in front of a charming blue house with a for sale sign in the front yard. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a small office that would be perfect for my consulting business. The price was listed at $450,000. With my salary and the money I'd be saving every month, I could qualify for a mortgage easily. I could have a house of my own, a place that belonged to me, a future I was building instead of funding someone else's present. I took a picture of the house and saved it to my phone, not because I was ready to buy it, but because I wanted to remember this moment. The moment I realized that my financial freedom could build something beautiful for myself, instead of just preventing something terrible for them. My phone rang as I sat there. Mom this time, I answered, curious to hear what approach she'd take. Carmen, sweetheart, I'm so glad you picked up. Her voice was warm, loving, the tone she used when she wanted something but didn't want to ask directly. How are you doing? You've seemed so stressed lately. Stressed, right. Stressed from working extra hours to pay their bills while they complained about my work schedule. Stressed from managing their finances while they criticized my priorities. Stressed from carrying their burdens while being called a burden myself. I'm actually feeling much better this week, Mom, more relaxed. That's wonderful, honey. Listen, your father feels terrible about what he said the other night. You know how he gets when he's worried about work. He doesn't mean the things he says when he's upset. The classic pattern. Dad says something cruel, Mom makes excuses, everyone pretends it never happened, and life goes back to normal. Except this time, normal had been canceled along with their mortgage payment. Mom, I said gently, what did Dad tell you about our conversation yesterday? There was a pause. He said there was some confusion with the bank about automatic payments, and that you might be able to help us figure out what happened. Even now, even facing foreclosure, they couldn't tell the truth, even to each other. Did he tell you that I've been making your entire mortgage payment for 2 years? The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. What? Her voice was tiny, confused. That's not possible, Carmen. We make our own house payment. You just help out sometimes with groceries and things. It was almost impressive how completely they'd rewritten reality in their own minds. They'd convinced themselves so thoroughly that they were financially independent that they genuinely seemed to believe it. Mom, when was the last time you wrote a check for the mortgage? When was the last time you saw Dad transfer money from your checking account to the mortgage company? Another long silence. I could practically hear her thinking, trying to remember, trying to reconcile what I was saying with what she'd believed to be true. I don't. I mean, it's automatic, so we don't really think about it. Her voice trailed off as understanding began to dawn. It's automatic from my account, Mom. Has been since March of 2023. $847 every month, plus insurance, plus property taxes, plus every emergency repair, plus Emma's college expenses, plus your medical bills, plus Dad's truck payments. I haven't just been helping out with groceries, I've been keeping you afloat. The silence this time was different, heavier, filled with the weight of recognition, of shame, of understanding that their comfortable life had been built on their daughter's sacrifice. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Carmen, I had no idea. We knew things were tight, but we thought we were managing okay. You were managing okay because I was managing for you. I looked at the blue house in front of me, imagining what it would feel like to have a mortgage payment that built my own equity instead of theirs. And yesterday, I decided to stop managing your problems so I could start managing my own opportunities. But sweetheart, she said, her voice becoming pleading, we can't afford the house without your help. We'll lose everything. The desperation was real, and part of me wanted to cave, wanted to swoop in and fix it like I always had. But a bigger part of me recognized that losing everything might be exactly what they needed. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because they needed to understand the true cost of their lifestyle. Mom, I said softly, you'll lose a house you couldn't afford to keep. That's not losing everything. That's facing reality. She started crying then, quiet sobs that cut through the phone line straight to my heart. What are we going to do? Where will we live? How will we tell people we lost our house? And there it was. The real fear, not about having a roof over their heads. Because there were apartments they could afford, smaller places that would fit their actual budget. The fear was about appearances, about admitting to their friends and neighbors that they'd been living beyond their means, about losing the house that made them look successful to people whose opinions shouldn't matter. You'll figure it out, I said. The same way millions of other people figure it out when their financial situation changes. You'll downsize, you'll adjust your lifestyle, you'll live within your means. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. For 2 years, I'd been enabling them to avoid those adjustments. I'd been their escape hatch from financial responsibility. "Carmen, please," she whispered. "Don't do this to us. We're your family. We love you." The manipulation was subtle but unmistakable. Love as a bargaining chip, family as an obligation. My financial support framed as a demonstration of my feelings for them rather than a choice I'd been making to help them. "If you love me," I said quietly, "then you'll understand why I need to love myself enough to stop enabling a situation that's hurting all of us." I hung up before she could respond, my hands surprisingly steady. The conversation had been difficult, but not devastating. There was clarity in finally naming the truth, relief in refusing to pretend anymore. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through downtown. The city looked different somehow. Brighter, more full of possibility. Without the weight of their financial problems on my shoulders, I felt lighter than I had in years. Free to make decisions based on what I wanted rather than what they needed. Free to build a life that served my goals instead of funding theirs. That evening, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I called my college roommate Jessica, who lived in Portland now with her husband and 2 kids. We'd stayed in touch sporadically, but I'd been too embarrassed to be honest about my family situation, too proud to admit that my financial success was being drained by their financial dysfunction. "Carmen." She sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. "How are you? It's been forever since we really talked." We caught up on work, on her kids, on life in general. Then she asked the question I'd been avoiding. "How's your family? Are your parents doing okay?" For the first time in years, I told the truth. I told her about Dad's reduced hours, about my secret financial support, about the conversation I'd overheard, about my decision to stop paying their bills. I told her about the guilt and the relief and the strange sense of freedom that came with finally putting myself first. Jessica listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions but not offering advice. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised me. "Carmen, I'm proud of you." Her voice was firm, supportive. "I've watched you struggle with family stuff for years, always putting everyone else first, always making excuses for people who didn't appreciate what you were doing for them. This takes courage." "It doesn't feel like courage," I admitted. "It feels like I'm abandoning them." Jessica laughed softly. "Abandoning them would have been disappearing without explanation. What you did was set a boundary. There's a difference. You told them the truth about what you'd been doing, you explained why you couldn't continue, and you gave them the opportunity to take responsibility for their own lives. That's not abandonment, that's tough love." Tough love. I'd never thought of it that way, but she was right. Real love sometimes meant refusing to enable destructive patterns. Real love sometimes meant letting people experience the consequences of their choices. Real love sometimes meant saying no to requests that would hurt both the giver and the receiver in the long run. After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: excitement about my own future. For the first time in years, I had the mental and financial space to dream about what I wanted, instead of just managing what they needed. I pulled out a notebook and started writing, not a budget for their expenses, but a plan for my own life, a house in that tree-lined neighborhood. A vacation to Italy I'd been postponing for 3 years, a business expansion that would let me work for myself instead of a corporation. Graduate school, maybe, or professional certifications that would advance my career. Simple things that had felt impossible when my money and energy were constantly flowing toward their problems. The list grew longer as I wrote. All the dreams I'd put on hold, all the goals I'd deferred, all the investments in myself I'd postponed while investing in their comfort. I'd been so focused on their immediate needs that I'd forgotten about my own long-term wants. I'd been so busy preventing their financial disaster that I'd been creating my own opportunity disaster. My phone buzzed with another text from Dad. "Carmen, the bank says we need to pay the full amount plus late fees by Monday or they begin foreclosure. That's over $900 we don't have. Please don't let us lose our home over a stupid comment I made when I was frustrated." A stupid comment. He was still minimizing what he'd said, still framing it as a momentary lapse rather than a revelation of how he really felt. Still avoiding accountability for the pattern of taking my support while resenting my success. Still missing the point entirely. I stared at the text for a long time, feeling something crystallize inside me. This wasn't about one comment. This wasn't about one payment. This was about 2 years of being their financial foundation, while being treated like their emotional burden. This was about being criticized for the very success that enabled me to help them. This was about being needed but not valued, used but not appreciated, required but not respected. I typed back a single sentence. "Dad, the payment you need to make is the same payment I've been making for you for 24 months. Figure it out the same way I did." Then I turned off my phone and ran a bath. As I sank into the hot water, I thought about the conversation with Jessica and the relief I'd felt at finally telling someone the truth. For 2 years, I'd been living a lie, pretending to friends and colleagues that my family was financially stable, that my help was minimal and occasional, that their criticism of my work habits was justified rather than hypocritical. I'd been protecting their reputation while sacrificing my own peace of mind. I'd been maintaining their dignity while compromising my own boundaries. I'd been preserving their pride while swallowing my own self-respect. And I was done. The bathwater grew cold as I planned my next moves. On Monday, I would call a realtor about that blue house. On Tuesday, I would meet with my financial advisor to discuss investment strategies for my newly available funds. On Wednesday, I would submit my business plan for Rodriguez Financial Strategy to the Small Business Development Center. On Thursday, I would register for the graduate program I'd been putting off because I couldn't afford the time or money while supporting them. For the first time in years, my calendar would be full of appointments for my own life, instead of solutions for their problems. My energy would go toward building my future instead of funding their present. My money would accumulate in accounts with my name on them, instead of flowing toward bills with their names on them. I got out of the bath and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked different. Not physically, but something in my eyes had changed. The constant underlying anxiety was gone. The perpetual guilt about not doing enough had evaporated. The exhaustion from working 2 jobs to fund 2 households had lifted. For the first time in years, I looked like a woman who was living her own life instead of financing someone else's. I turned my phone back on to 17 missed calls and 12 text messages. The panic was escalating. Emma had called 6 times. Mom had called 4 times. Dad had called 7 times. The text messages ranged from pleading to angry to desperate to confused. They were experiencing something they hadn't felt in 2 years, the actual weight of their financial problems. I scrolled through the messages without reading them in detail. Whatever drama was unfolding, whatever crisis was developing, whatever emergency was erupting, it would have to unfold without my participation. Their crisis was no longer my crisis. Their emergency was no longer my emergency. Their problem was no longer my problem. And for the first time in 2 years, I was free to focus on my own solutions instead of theirs. I made myself dinner, something elaborate that required actual cooking instead of microwaving leftovers between family phone calls. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. I put on music that made me happy, instead of calming background noise designed to soothe my constant anxiety. And as I ate my perfectly prepared meal in my perfectly peaceful apartment, I realized that the special occasion had finally arrived. Not a holiday or birthday or promotion. Just the simple, revolutionary act of choosing myself. Just the quiet, powerful decision to stop being their burden so I could finally stop carrying theirs. The evening stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities that belonged entirely to me. No family financial crisis to solve. No emergency transfer to make. No guilt trip to navigate. No criticism to absorb while continuing to help anyway. Just silence. Sweet silence, and the sound of my own voice finally saying what I should have said years ago. No more. Monday morning brought something I hadn't experienced in years. The luxury of sleeping in. No urgent calls about overdue bills. No panic attacks about family emergencies. No 6 a.m. wake-up calls from parents who'd forgotten about time zones and boundaries in equal measure. I woke up naturally at 8:30, made French press coffee, and read the entire newspaper while eating actual breakfast, instead of grabbing a protein bar on my way out the door. At exactly 9:15, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see my father standing on my doorstep, looking older than I remembered. His usual confident posture was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man who'd spent the weekend learning what financial desperation actually felt like. He was holding a manila folder and shifting his weight from foot to foot like a nervous salesman. I didn't open the door immediately. I stood there for a moment, looking at this man who had raised me, supported my education, cheered at my graduation, and then somehow transformed into someone who could call his successful daughter a burden while cashing her checks. The contradiction was staggering, and for the first time I could see it clearly, because I wasn't drowning in guilt about disappointing him. When I finally opened the door, he looked relieved and desperate in equal measure. "Carmen, thank God you're here. I was worried you might have left town or something." The assumption that I might flee rather than face him told me everything I needed to know about how he viewed conflict resolution. Run away, avoid consequences, let someone else clean up the mess. "It's my apartment, Dad. Where would I go?" I didn't invite him in, didn't step aside to let him enter. He stood in my doorway like a supplicant, which was probably the first time in his adult life he'd had to ask someone younger for help he couldn't demand or manipulate his way into receiving. "Can we talk? Please? I brought some paperwork that might help explain the situation." He held up the manila folder like it contained salvation, instead of what I suspected were bank statements he'd never really examined before. Documents that would show him exactly how precarious his financial situation had always been, how impossible it would have been to maintain their lifestyle without my intervention. I stepped aside and let him into my living room, but I didn't offer coffee or try to make him comfortable. This wasn't a social visit. This was a business meeting he'd been avoiding for 2 years. He sat on the edge of my couch like he might need to leave quickly, the folder clutched in his hands like a shield. "Carmen," he began, his voice more humble than I'd ever heard it. "I spent the weekend going through our finances, really looking at them for the first time in a long time." He opened the folder and spread papers across my coffee table. Bank statements, bills, payment histories, all organized with the desperate precision of a man who'd suddenly realized he didn't understand his own financial life. "What did you find?" I asked, sitting in my armchair rather than next to him on the couch. The physical distance felt important, a boundary that said we were no longer operating as family but as two adults having a difficult conversation about money and accountability. He picked up a bank statement and pointed to a line item. "These automatic payments that have been coming out every month. I always assumed they were for utilities or insurance or something we'd set up and forgotten about. But they're going to the mortgage company." His finger traced the line across the page. $847 every month for 24 months. I nodded. Plus the insurance payments. Plus the property tax escrow. Plus the emergency repairs. He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. Not the performative apology of someone trying to get out of trouble, but the deep shame of someone who'd finally understood the magnitude of their blindness. "Carmen, I don't understand how this happened. How did we not know? How did we think we were paying our own mortgage when we clearly weren't?" The question revealed so much about their financial literacy, their willingness to avoid difficult truths, their comfort with magical thinking when it served their comfort. "You didn't want to know," I said simply. "Every month your mortgage got paid, and you didn't ask questions because asking questions might have led to uncomfortable answers. It was easier to believe you were managing well than to examine how you were actually managing at all." He spread out more papers, credit card statements showing minimum payments I'd been covering. Insurance bills with my name as the authorized payer. Property tax records showing payments from my account. A paper trail of dependency so complete it was like looking at the financial records of a subsidiary company rather than an independent household. The bank manager explained some things to me on Friday, he said, his voice getting smaller with each word. She said you'd been listed as the primary payer since 2023. She said you had full authority to modify or cancel payments because you were the one making them. She said this was actually pretty common in families where one person carries the financial load for others. Common. The word stung because it meant I wasn't special, wasn't uniquely generous or uniquely stupid. I was just another successful adult child who'd gotten trapped in a cycle of financial enabling, another person who'd confused helping with healing, another family member who'd mistaken enabling for loving. Dad, I said, leaning forward. What I don't understand is how you could accept that much help while complaining about the person helping you. How you could criticize my work schedule while depending on my work income. How you could call me a burden while I was literally carrying your burden. His face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like a child who'd been caught in a lie too big to explain away. I was embarrassed, he said finally. Ashamed that my daughter was supporting me instead of the other way around. Angry at myself for not being able to provide for my family the way I thought I should. And instead of dealing with those feelings, I took them out on you. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, and also the most painful, because it meant he'd known exactly what he was doing when he criticized me. He'd known I was sacrificing for them, and his response had been to make me feel bad about it instead of grateful for it. He'd punished me for his own shame instead of examining why he felt ashamed. So you made me the problem, I said, understanding finally clicking into place. Instead of feeling bad about needing help, you made me feel bad about giving it. Instead of being grateful, you made me feel guilty. Instead of acknowledging what I was doing, you made me question whether I was doing enough. He nodded, tears starting to form in his eyes. I convinced myself that you were trying to control us, that you were making us dependent on purpose. I told myself that you enjoyed having power over us, that you were using money to manipulate us. It was easier than admitting that we'd become dependent because we'd stopped taking responsibility for our own lives. The psychology was textbook, and I'd seen it in business consulting countless times. When people become dependent on external support, they often resent the source of that support to protect their own ego. It's easier to blame the helper than to examine why help is needed. It's easier to criticize the solution than to acknowledge the problem. And calling me a burden? I asked, the words still stinging even though I'd had days to process them. How does that fit into your psychological defense mechanism? His shoulders sagged even further. I wanted to believe that you were the problem, that if you just went away, our financial stress would go away too. I convinced myself that your help was somehow making things worse, that we'd be fine if we could just get rid of the pressure you were putting on us. What pressure? I asked, genuinely confused. I never asked you for anything. I never made demands. I never even mentioned the money unless you brought up financial stress first. He looked down at the papers scattered across my coffee table, evidence of his delusion spelled out in black and white. The pressure of knowing we owed you, he said quietly. The pressure of feeling like failures because our daughter was more successful than we were. The pressure of having to be grateful when we wanted to be proud. The pressure of being parents who needed our child's help instead of children who needed their parents' support. For the first time, I understood the twisted logic that had driven his behavior. He'd been angry at me for succeeding where he'd failed, for being capable where he was struggling, for having solutions where he only had problems. My success hadn't been something to celebrate. It had been a mirror that reflected his limitations. My help hadn't been generosity. It had been a daily reminder of his inadequacy. Dad, I said, my voice softer now, did it ever occur to you that I might have been struggling too? That supporting two households on one income might have been difficult for me? That working extra hours to cover your bills might have been stressful? That being criticized by the people I was helping might have been painful? The question seemed to surprise him, as if my experience hadn't been part of his calculations at all. I guess I assumed it was easy for you. You make good money, You don't have kids. Your life seemed so together compared to ours. I thought you were helping us because you had extra, not because you were sacrificing. I don't have extra, Dad. I've been living like someone who makes half my salary, because the other half was going to you. I've been postponing my own goals, my own dreams, my own security to ensure yours. And instead of gratitude, I got criticism. Instead of appreciation, I got resentment. Instead of acknowledgement, I got called a burden. He was crying now, quiet tears that spoke to genuine remorse rather than manipulative self-pity. Carmen, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to undo the damage I've done. And I don't know how to solve our financial problems without your help. We're going to lose the house, and we have nowhere else to go. There it was. The real conversation we should have had 2 years ago. Not demands disguised as family obligation, not guilt trips wrapped in emotional manipulation, but honest acknowledgement of their situation, and a direct request for help. It was too late to save the relationship, but it was the first genuine conversation we'd had about money in years. What's your plan? I asked. Not your plan for getting me to resume payments, but your actual plan for moving forward. He looked confused, as if the idea of having a plan independent of my financial support had never occurred to him. I don't know, he admitted. I've been hoping you'd change your mind. I'm not changing my mind, I said firmly. So what's your backup plan? The question forced him to confront something he'd been avoiding, the need to take responsibility for his own financial future. For 2 years, I'd been his backup plan, his safety net, his solution to every financial problem. Without me, he had to actually plan. We could try to refinance, but our credit isn't great, he said slowly, thinking through options for the first time. We could get a second job, but at my age, finding work is tough. We could downsize, sell the house, and find something smaller, but then we'd be admitting defeat. Admitting defeat to whom? I asked. Your neighbors? Your friends? People who have no idea what your real financial situation is and wouldn't care if they did? The question hit something deep, because his face changed, became defensive. It's not about what other people think, he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. It's about what we've worked for, what we've built. That house represents 30 years of marriage, of building a life together. Losing it feels like losing everything we've accomplished. Dad, I said gently, what you've accomplished is raising 2 daughters who love you despite your flaws. What you've accomplished is staying married for 30 years, through good times and bad. What you've accomplished is surviving a job loss and a financial crisis without destroying your family completely. The house is just a building. Your accomplishments are about relationships and resilience, not real estate. He looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. The idea that his worth wasn't tied to his possessions, that his success wasn't measured by his mortgage payment, that his identity wasn't dependent on maintaining a lifestyle he couldn't afford, seemed completely foreign to him. But where would we live? He asked, and I could hear the genuine fear in his voice. How would we explain to people that we had to sell our house? The questions revealed so much about his priorities. He was more worried about explaining the situation to others than about solving it for himself. You'd live in a place you could afford, I said. A smaller house, or a nice apartment, or maybe you'd rent for a while until you figured out what you really wanted. And you'd explain it the same way millions of other people explain financial changes. You'd say your circumstances changed, so you adjusted accordingly. The conversation continued for another hour, with Dad slowly working through the reality of his situation. No, he couldn't afford the mortgage without my help. No, his income wasn't going to increase significantly. No, I wasn't going to resume payments. Yes, he would have to make difficult decisions about their lifestyle. Yes, this would require him to take responsibility for financial planning he'd been avoiding. But something else emerged during that conversation. For the first time in years, we were talking as adults rather than as parent and child. He wasn't lecturing me about family obligations, and I wasn't apologizing for having boundaries. He wasn't making demands, and I wasn't making excuses. We were just 2 people discussing a difficult situation, honestly. Carmen, he said as he prepared to leave, I know I have no right to ask this, and I know I've burned any goodwill I might have had, but is there any possibility you might consider helping us transition? Not resuming the full payments, but maybe giving us a few months to figure out our next steps? The request was different from his usual approach. No emotional manipulation, no family guilt, no assumptions about my obligations. Just a direct ask for specific help with clear boundaries. It was the kind of conversation we should have been having all along. "I'll think about it," I said, and I meant it. Not because I was ready to resume my role as their financial foundation, but because a transitional plan might be the difference between an orderly downsizing and a chaotic foreclosure. But any help would come with conditions: full transparency about your finances, a realistic budget based on your actual income, a specific timeline for achieving financial independence, and no more criticism of my choices or my priorities. He nodded eagerly, desperate enough to agree to terms he would have rejected a week earlier. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you think is fair." The willingness to negotiate rather than demand was new, and it gave me hope that this crisis might actually lead to healthier family dynamics rather than just financial resolution. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment processing the conversation. It had been painful but productive, difficult but necessary. For the first time in years, we'd talked about money honestly, without pretense or manipulation or denial. He'd acknowledged his mistakes, admitted his financial reality, and asked for help instead of assuming it was owed to him. It was progress, but it wasn't enough to rebuild trust that had been eroded over years of financial enabling and emotional manipulation. Trust would have to be earned through actions, not words. Respect would have to be demonstrated through behavior, not promises. Change would have to be proven through time, not just acknowledged in crisis moments. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad said he talked to you and that you might help with a transition plan. Is that true?" I could hear the hope in her message. The relief that maybe this crisis wouldn't end with complete family destruction. But I could also hear the assumption that I would eventually cave, that my boundaries were negotiable, that family meant I couldn't really say no forever. I texted back. "We had a good conversation. I'm considering options, but things can't go back to the way they were." Her response came immediately. "I understand. I think what you're doing is actually good for all of us, even though it's scary." Emma's insight surprised me. She was beginning to understand that my financial enabling hadn't been helping any of us, that my refusal to set boundaries had been harmful to everyone involved. She was starting to see that this crisis was an opportunity for growth, not just a disaster to be avoided. That evening, I called my financial advisor and scheduled the meeting we'd discussed. I also called the realtor about the blue house, just to get information about the buying process. I wasn't ready to make offers or commitments, but I was ready to explore possibilities that had been close to me for years. The realtor was enthusiastic about my financial profile. "With your income and credit score, you'd qualify for excellent mortgage terms," she said. "And in this market, having a substantial down payment gives you a real advantage." A substantial down payment that would exist because I was no longer making someone else's down payment every month. As I hung up, I realized something important had shifted. The conversation with Dad hadn't changed my decision about resuming payments, but it had changed my understanding of what was possible. Maybe this crisis could lead to better relationships rather than broken ones. Maybe setting boundaries could teach respect rather than create resentment. Maybe refusing to enable could actually help rather than hurt. But that would depend on their willingness to change, not just their desperation for my help. That would require them to examine their own patterns, not just beg for my forgiveness. That would demand real accountability, not just crisis-driven apologies. The next few days would tell me everything I needed to know about whether this family was ready to grow or just ready to manipulate me into resuming my role as their personal bank account. Either way, I was finally ready to find out, because for the first time in years, the answer wouldn't determine my own financial security. I was free to help or not help based on what felt right, not what felt necessary. And that freedom, more than anything else, felt like the real victory in this whole situation. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, brewing coffee in a machine I'd bought without checking my bank balance first. The morning light streamed through windows that belonged to me, in a house I'd purchased with money that stayed in my accounts long enough to grow into something meaningful. The blue craftsman house had been even more perfect than I'd imagined. 3 bedrooms, a home office where Rodriguez financial strategy was thriving, and a garden where I'd planted vegetables I'd actually have time to tend. The mortgage payment was mine, the equity was mine, and the pride was mine. My phone chimed with a text from Emma. Dad finished his real estate course yesterday. He's officially licensed now. I smiled, remembering the conversation where Dad had announced his plan to become a realtor. At 67, he'd decided that if he was going to lose one house, he might as well learn how to help other people buy and sell theirs. It wasn't the retirement he'd planned, but it was honest work that used his natural social skills. They'd sold the house on Maple Street in April, not in foreclosure, not in panic, but in a planned sale that gave them enough equity to put a down payment on a small condo near Emma's college and start fresh with a budget that actually matched their income. Mom had gotten a job at a local credit union, helping other families navigate financial difficulties. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. I'd helped with their transition, but on my terms. 3 months of mortgage payments while they prepared for the sale, financial counseling sessions where we'd gone through their budget line by line, and clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't support going forward. They'd learned to manage their own money, and I'd learned that helping didn't have to mean sacrificing. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the window, I could see Emma's car in my driveway. She'd driven up from Portland for the weekend, something she'd started doing regularly since I'd moved into my own place. Our relationship had improved dramatically once she understood the real dynamics of our family's finances. "This place gets more beautiful every time I see it," she said, giving me a hug as she came through the front door. "And you look different too, happier, more relaxed." She was right. The constant tension I'd carried for years had melted away, replaced by a calm confidence I'd never experienced before. We sat on my back porch with our coffee, looking out at the garden where tomatoes and herbs were thriving under my care rather than my neglect. "How are Mom and Dad adjusting to the condo?" I asked. Emma smiled. "Better than expected, actually. Mom loves being walking distance from downtown, and Dad's really enjoying his real estate work. He sold 2 houses last month." "And financially?" I asked, because old habits of worry die hard. "They're managing. It's tight, but they're actually making it work on their own income. Mom's job pays better than the grocery store, and Dad's commission checks are helping. They're not living like they used to, but they seem, I don't know, more authentic somehow." Authentic. That was the perfect word for what had happened to all of us. We'd stopped pretending, stopped performing, stopped maintaining illusions that served no one. They'd stopped pretending they were financially independent, and I'd stopped pretending that enabling them was healthy for anyone. "They ask about you," Emma said carefully. "Not for money," she added quickly, seeing my expression. "Just, they miss you. They're proud of you for buying this place, for starting your own business. Dad brags about you to his real estate clients." The idea of Dad bragging about me felt foreign after years of criticism, but Emma seemed sincere. "Maybe we'll have dinner sometime," I said, and I meant it. The anger had faded, replaced by something more mature and sustainable. I could love them without funding them. I could support them emotionally without supporting them financially. I could be their daughter without being their bank account. My phone buzzed with a notification from my business banking app. Rodriguez Financial Strategy had just received payment from 3 new clients this month. My consulting practice was growing faster than I'd ever imagined, fueled by the energy and focus I'd gained from resolving my own financial codependency. "Speaking of business," Emma said, "I have something to tell you. I'm switching my major to financial planning." She looked almost embarrassed. Watching what happened with our family made me realize how many people probably struggle with money relationships like we did. I want to help families have healthier conversations about finances. The news filled me with pride and hope. Emma was turning our family's dysfunction into purpose, using our painful lessons to help others avoid similar traps. She was choosing a career that would prevent the kind of financial enabling I'd fallen into, the kind of boundary violations that had nearly destroyed our relationships. "That's amazing, Em, and you'll be incredible at it because you understand both sides. You know what it feels like to be the person receiving help, and you've seen what it costs the person giving it." We talked for hours about her career plans, about my business growth, about the ways our family had changed and healed since the crisis. As the afternoon faded into evening, Emma asked the question I'd been expecting. "Do you ever regret it? The way you handled things, I mean. Do you ever wish you'd just kept paying and avoided all the drama?" I considered the question seriously. Did I regret setting boundaries that had temporarily torn my family apart, but ultimately made us all stronger? No, I said finally. I regret waiting so long to do it. I regret enabling dysfunction for 2 years instead of addressing it sooner. I regret teaching them that my love could be measured by my bank transfers instead of my actual presence in their lives. I looked around at my home, my garden, my life that finally belonged entirely to me, but I don't regret choosing myself. I don't regret demanding respect. I don't regret refusing to be called a burden while carrying everyone's burdens. And I don't regret discovering that love without boundaries isn't love at all. Emma nodded thoughtfully. You know what's funny? They're actually happier now too. They were so stressed about money before, always worried about keeping up appearances, always anxious about bills they couldn't really afford. Now they're living within their means, and there's something peaceful about that. She was right. The crisis had forced everyone to face reality. And reality, while initially painful, had turned out to be more sustainable than the fantasy I'd been funding. They were living authentic lives now, making real choices based on actual resources rather than imaginary ones. As Emma prepared to drive back to Portland, she hugged me tightly. Thank you, she said, for showing me what healthy boundaries look like, for teaching me that helping someone sometimes means refusing to help them, for proving that choosing yourself isn't selfish if it forces everyone else to grow up. After she left, I walked through my house, turning on lights against the gathering dusk. Every room was exactly as I'd wanted it, furnished with things I'd chosen, decorated with colors that made me happy. There were no family photos demanding guilt, no bills requiring immediate attention, no phone calls interrupting my peace. Just quiet, beautiful solitude in a home I'd built, with money I'd earned, and energy I'd reclaimed, and choices I'd made for myself rather than despite myself. My phone chimed with one final text of the day. From Dad. Sold a house today and thought of you. The clients reminded me of us, actually. Successful daughter helping parents who didn't appreciate it until almost too late. I told them to be grateful now instead of sorry later. Hope you're well, sweetheart. I smiled and texted back, congratulations on the sale. Proud of you for building something new. It was true. I was proud of him for choosing growth over resentment, for taking responsibility instead of assigning blame, for learning new skills instead of just lamenting old limitations. The conversation was brief but genuine, free from the undercurrent of financial tension that had poisoned our relationship for years. We were finally talking as equals rather than as creditor and debtor, as father and daughter, rather than as obligation and burden. As I got ready for bed in my own home, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. Exhausted, anxious, financially drained, emotionally depleted. Working 2 jobs to fund 2 households while being criticized for my priorities by the people benefiting from my sacrifice. Carrying everyone's burdens while being called a burden myself. That woman felt like a stranger now. In her place was someone I was still getting to know. Someone who said no without guilt. Who helped without enabling. Who loved without losing herself. Someone who understood that the greatest gift you can give your family is teaching them to stand on their own, even if it means watching them stumble first. I turned off the lights and settled into my own bed, in my own room, in my own house, surrounded by the peaceful silence of a life lived authentically. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new choices to make, based on what served my growth rather than what soothed someone else's comfort. And for the first time in years, I was excited to find out what those choices might be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.